Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paizo Friday. I'm Mark Seifter, design manager here at Paizo.
Hi, I'm Logan Bonner. I'm Pathfinder lead designer.
And today we're here to talk to you about the Advanced Player's Guide Playtest Retrospective plus more bonus content.
Yeah.
In all, we're going to go for about 50% longer, all the way to 5:30, and that's so that we can team up with Jason and Liz, the other two designers, and director of game design in Jason's case, are both over at PAX Unplugged, and Jason's about to be doing at 5:30 a big, enormous glass cannon stream over there at PAX Unplugged. So we'll be able to rate him at the end if you guys stick with us for the full extra length episode.
And we've also got a whole bunch of people over at PAX Unplugged. So if you're in the Philadelphia area, we've got Jason and Liz from our team. Tanya's there for organized play, and Eric Mona himself is making an appearance.
Yep. You might even be able to spot Luis, who's going there for fun, but he's not there.
Yeah, he'll be in disguise.
Yeah, he's in disguise, so it's going to be even harder. You really need to know to look out for. But if you've watched enough Paizo Fridays, you've seen him on those other Fridays.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, next Friday's episode, just so you guys know ahead of time, is going to be a double header again. Age of Ashes Part 5 retrospective with James Jacobs and John Compton, and then Age of Ashes Part 6 with James Jacobs and Luis Loza. So that's what we've got going on next week. But also, there's more, because there's always more. There is a Humble Bundle going on right now, the Pathfinder Comics Cache. It's got a whole bunch of cool Pathfinder comics, a lot of hardcovers, and that very first trilogy of modules from when Pathfinder First Edition came out, the Crypt of the Everflame, Mask of the Living God, City of Golden Death. But it's almost done. I think there's 4 days left on it.
4 days, and it's a really nice mix of comics and RPG books, so you can really kind of do a deep dive into some of the lore and the characterization that are in those comics. They're all really, really fun reads.
But the one that I'm even more excited about is the one that Eric Mona sort of announced in the blog when he announced the first bundle, which is once the first one is over, and this may be already true by the time you guys see this on YouTube, if you're YouTube watchers, there's going to be a second bundle focusing on the lore of the Lost Omen setting. And I just feel like that's an amazing idea, given that Second Edition is out, and it might make it easier for someone who's just coming in but really wants to learn more about the world to buy that bundle and just get a bunch of lore for a really great price while supporting a good charity. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah. So that's at humblebundle.com, and look for the Pathfinder Comics Cache. It's the book bundle.
And I don't know exactly what the name of the other one will be, but you'll see it, and it'll be great.
Check our socials.
Yep.
Yeah. So absolutely. With all that taken care of, let's talk about the Advanced Player's Guide playtest, which ended not too long ago. Mark, do you want to talk about kind of closing off the end of it?
Sure. So, we officially, the last day of the playtest was this Monday. We did leave the surveys open until beginning of work on Tuesday to give people a little bit more time if you're from a different time zone and it just wasn't convenient to take it after the weekend yet.
And we had a survey going for that, just like we did with the Pathfinder playtest, because we got really good data out of that. So we made sure we did that again.
We had a data survey and we had a free response survey. And we've looked through all of the responses from both of those. Thank you so much for participating in the playtest, everyone. I was very happy to see that around half as many people did our APG class survey as the overall game class survey, which was also one of our more popular surveys for the game. So that just shows the dedication to the game and the commitment that all you Pathfinder fans have. And it humbles me how many people work to help together with us to figure out about these classes, and I'm really excited.
Yeah. And we had a pretty big uptick in numbers toward the end too. A lot of people kind of got their data in at the end. So it was how are these numbers doing? And then it kind of shot up.
The blog, when it came out that last Wednesday before Thanksgiving, that said, remember to get your answers in. And then whoosh, we got a new set of answers that had more people who had played more and just some interesting perspectives. So It's pretty awesome.
Hold on, Rocket Lettuce. Are you saying that you were using a Swashbuckler against your PCs, or are you saying that Panache got them into situations that got them killed? I'm curious about that one.
Yeah, that is a good question because maybe he was using a Swashbuckler against the PCs. In my Cradle of Night game, which I'll talk about a little bit during this stream, I turned one of the enemies, who was a bard that had like a swashbuckling weapon, into a braggart swashbuckler, and it was lots of fun just insulting the PCs left and right.
And the nice thing is you're doing the thing and you get to decide whether it counts for a panache, so you kind of win-win for the GM on that.
Well, it was demoralized, which does count as panache normally for the braggart, but
obviously you weren't doing a lot of improvising. Okay, so I think we're going to talk about kind of the individual classes from the playtest. We're going to go just kind of in order, and then we'll probably talk about the kind of general playtest a little bit more after we kind of go through those.
Yep.
I also want to mention that Liz Liddell isn't here. She did the primary work on the Oracle and the Witch, and was on the message boards a lot, kind of talking with people about their experiences playing those two classes. So we've got some notes from her. We're gonna kind of summarize those. But I did the Investigator and Mark did the Swashbuckler. So we're gonna probably have a little more
secondary
depth
on everything. So I have a little bit of insight into all of them.
Yeah, but we're gonna take questions later, and the two of us will know a little more about those two classes than we do about the Oracle and Witch, just because we weren't quite as deep into those.
I know an okay about, but clearly we don't have all of Liz's insights here, but we had a extra long, over 3 hour long design meeting where we did a download with Liz, got everything. And if you've been on the message boards, you know Liz was on there, and she was really doing a great job with some of the, shall we say, more vociferous witch discussions in particular, about really more about some of the flavor and decisions for the witch. And we'll get into all of that alphabetically, starting with the Investigator.
We'll start with the Investigator. So the Investigator is the class I did the initial design on, but I also had to go out of town, and I had like a week to get everything done, and I got sick for 4 out of the 5 days of that week. So I kind of left a bunch of notes that Mark then executed on. I got like, here's half the class features and some ideas for feats. Crap, I gotta go.
So when you came back, you had it to go through.
Yeah, and then I kind of did a little pass on it when I got back.
All the best names came from Logan renaming things that I had or adding a new thing.
Well, and I added, I think one of the last things I did was we need a feat called One More Thing. Yep. So I wrote that like a little bit before we had to pass it over to edit. So the Investigator, and I wasn't on the message boards a whole lot, partially because I was gone for parts of that, and partially because it was relatively chill over there. There wasn't a whole lot of super contentious stuff. There were some kind of general threads, which were that intelligence wasn't really doing enough for the class, and that there were like study suspect wasn't quite as exciting as it could be, particularly if you tried to study a suspect and you failed, you didn't really get anything, and that didn't feel great for one of the kind of your core mechanics.
Especially if you were up against like a high level boss thing that had a very high will, you just had a very low chance of getting your core mechanic. The odds were good for most things, but it just didn't work out. And I know that, Logan, you've been bouncing around several possible new ideas for it, but we're not sure what yet. But we know that you guys have told us it's not delivering, and we need to make some changes.
And there are some ideas, and some of it is kind of like it's we saw places like through the playtest feedback where we could stretch it a little further from the Pathfinder 1 version, which we'd already done a fair amount of stretching, but it was kind of like, oh, people kind of want us to go a little further with this. And I think the study suspect, studied strike thing was just a little too, it hadn't gone far enough from its roots.
The playtest feedback really made it clear, because with some of these classes, we'll get to this with the Swashbuckler too, we took a risk in trying to cut to the essence of the story of that class from movies, books, why you want to play them in fiction, and not always hewing exactly to first edition. And in the case of the Investigator, you guys told us in the response of the surveys, not only was that good, you guys liked the options more that were hewing less to first edition, and so we realized in some ways we can lean further in on those themes while still respecting the tradition of the class from first edition. For instance, many of you guys said that the alchemical sciences option was very strong, but also didn't pick it nearly as often for your own characters as the other options, even though that was more the legacy first edition investigator option. So a lot of interesting data, and you guys are helping us move forward with that class.
Yeah, and the one of the other comments I got, so one of the things we wanted to test was kind of trying to make that class a little less into the specific rules and have a little more stuff where it's going to be a little more GM and player working things out, like whether
sort of narrative.
Yeah, a little more narrative. Because the first edition one, you could spin the point and you get the die, and that's what it does. And we knew we wanted Pathfinder 2 overall to have a little more of a narrative dimension, have fewer things kind of set in stone so that it could work out with your group and you could figure out how things were going to play at your specific table. And the Investigator is one where it's like there's so much stuff that the Investigator needs to do that's not really super defined in the rules on purpose to make games more flexible. And like if this is working with this, are people going to be okay with that? And we did find like through the surveys that generally speaking, yes, people are not too upset by that kind of change. And we think it worked pretty well in folks' games, generally speaking.
In free responses, when we asked, like, what are the parts you liked, those narrative parts were pretty well liked and received, even from some people who gave more mixed opinions on the Investigator as a whole. That was one thing that got a good review. So thanks for all of your feedback.
Yeah. There's also some balance of how the stuff we put out in the playtest that was trying to focus on some of the non-combat aspects of the Investigator, because those are the things we really thought needed the strongest amount of testing. Mm-hmm. So for example, we got a lot of people saying, I want more combat options for my Investigator. And we've always planned to include more combat options, but we kind of leaned on the side of some of the more the narrative investigative stuff for the playtest because we wanted to get more eyes on those.
Right. And if we gave a basic combat option at those levels, chances are people would have taken that more because it's a combat option. We would then get a lot less testing on the non-combat options. So it makes it easier for the playtest, but worry not, more combat options are coming.
Yeah. A lot of it is finding out, like, what does the Investigator look like in combat? What feels like you're investigating while you're fighting and that kind of thing.
Yep, because you have to feel like, a lot of people talk about the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes, where you're thinking things through. Feel like you're using your brains and your investigation when you fight rather than just going at it and chopping people apart. Yeah. So.
And Mark does have some of the survey data here. So like some of the information he's giving is going to be based on like the specifics from the survey.
That's right. And I can also say that you guys like the Investigator well overall in the survey, but everything we talked about here were some caveats that caused some people to rate certain aspects of it a little bit lower, but overall it had a pretty good solid rating for everyone. So
and all the classes had pretty good overall ratings,
except one.
Except one, which we'll get to at the end.
Yes.
But like there weren't a whole lot of like, oh, this one's a love it or hate it kind of class. They were all pretty positive generally.
Yep. The 3 had pretty positive ratings. 1 had extremely positive ratings. Yeah. And that's the one that was different.
And we used the same scale we had in the playtest, so we had something to compare it to, because some of the classes in the playtest were rated lower, so we could kind of see lower. Like, here's what happens if people are really not happy with the class.
Like the Ranger and the Alchemist in the playtest.
Yeah, they were rated significantly lower than the others. So we had a baseline for that going into this one.
So let's see. I think that's good for the Investigator. There's just a lot of,
and like I said, we'll take some questions further along. We'll probably go through all the classes and then start taking some questions.
Maybe talk about maybe I can tell a little story about my playtest and just take questions from you guys and do a little playtest stuff. We have some other additional content that we'll give you guys as well. So let's move on to the Oracle class. So the Oracle class is definitely one that had some interesting feedback about it. For instance, according to the surveys, it had the Oracle's curse, which thematically was rated as one of the 2 most thematically powerful and effective things, that not for mechanics, just for how cool was this, how interesting. The other was Panache and the Swashbuckler. But that power-wise had a lot of sporadic differences between people. Some of the options were not rated as well, and in particular, it was different between curses for different people. People couldn't decide which curses were the strongest, which one were the weakest. But we had an overall trend that the balance of what Liz likes to call the sort of the triangle of the Oracle, which is curse benefits for going deeper into the curse drawbacks for going deeper into the curse, and the effect of the focus spells, the revelation spells themselves, was not working. In particular, that they need to give a greater benefit than what they were giving potentially, and their drawbacks were a little bit were too harsh. That combined with some of the revelation spells maybe not being the right spell. Liz said that she's very strongly considering changing out the first level revelation spell from life, from a situational one about afflictions to one that you can use more consistently, because I mean that one's good if you get hit by an affliction. In my playtest game, my group never did, or they never failed against the affliction in the first place. And the Life Oracle was in my group. He was great at healing, but he never used that focus spell just because it didn't come up.
And your first focus spell, like from a class design perspective, that's the first focus spell is always really important, because that's kind of where you establish whether you're going to be using your focus spells or not. So getting that first one to be a little more evergreen is really a good change, I think.
Yep. And so another one that Liz was looking at is that it was just, you guys said, it was really unfun to go unconscious when you overcharge your curse beyond the end result. So Liz is looking at several options that she brought up to us. The current favorite that we're considering is that you lose access to all of your focus spells for the rest of the day once you have supercharged your curse beyond the point of no return. So because it's very related to the thing that you did, which was use more focus spells than you should have. And so you can still cast your regular spells. You can still fight normally. Other than that, you're just in the deep curse for the rest of the day and have no focus spells. You can't refocus it back. So that's what she's looking at. That doesn't mean it's 100% going to be what it changes to, but that's where the headspace is at for that.
There's an interesting comment on there about whose players wanted to try the other oracles but not the Life Oracle. But it was interesting because in your playtest you had a Life Oracle, and since they started at a higher level, they started out with their second focus spell, and I think that made a big difference because it sounded like they were very effective.
The Life Oracle in my playtest was a dynamo because of the fact, especially the party got themselves into big trouble in one point where we were doing an up-leveled Cradle of Night, up-leveled by 2, so that when we went from 10 to 11 to 12, the major curse would hit him for the Life Oracle, and converted to Second Edition. They managed to go into the back of one of the dungeons through a back door that you're fairly likely to take, kill a boss, and then trigger the entire rest of the entire dungeon into attacking them at once in a big room.
Yeah.
Or as fast as they could coming from other rooms. So it was an encounter that was like extreme plus, but did have a little bit of time for the other guys to come in. And the Life Oracle, due to a combination of Life Link, Shield Other, and Healer's Gloves on himself to heal himself, and extremely good heal spells using the D12s, was able to keep up the Fencer Swashbuckler, who was getting himself into huge trouble, flanked by tons of sneak attacking enemies. And the Life Oracle will be like, how much are you missing now? 120? 120, but I just healed you to full last turn. Yeah, I'm surrounded by 8 guys. So he healed more than almost anybody else could heal at once, and showed the Nova potential of the Life Oracle. Yeah. That being said, there are also some significant drawbacks to the Life Oracle.
Yeah.
So I think that those are the really big things that that Liz was talking about, is rebalancing to make sure that those the curse benefits and curse drawbacks in particular make you kind of interested in progressing them to get the benefits in a way that makes you think of it as another tool at your disposal, an interesting tactic of whether you're in one or the other, rather than many people who were feeling like, well, I want my revelation spell, I guess, but this is definitely bad that I'm progressing my curse. So we'll see if we can get that out there, because you guys said it was interesting, it was exciting, it just wasn't strong enough of an effect, and we can get that mechanical shift in there. So that's the Oracle, more or less, and really all of the data that I brought about here is about that cursed part in that regard.
And I think the Oracle was pretty close and like all the classes except for the Swashbuckler were pretty close.
Which was a little higher. The Oracle and the Investigator were almost tied exactly in satisfaction. The only difference was
they're like 0.1 apart or something.
They looked a little different because the Oracle had more people who were like, oh my gosh, I love this. This is the best thing ever. And a few more who were like, I'm not satisfied by it, which came out to the same average. Whereas the Investigator, a lot of people were like, this is
a lot of fours.
This is very good, but not extremely good. And that it came out to the same on average in the end. So let's talk about,
speaking of the
Swashbuckler. So the Swashbuckler was the one I was kind of really worried about. The Swashbuckler when we were planning to put it in the book in the first place. There were a lot of people worried about, like, would it be an overlap with other options that existed?
Yeah, and especially the fighter, the duelist options for the fighter,
the Eldori duelist. There are a million of those. And I've played a Swashbuckler out to a lot of levels in Skull and Shackles. I'm in part 6 in first edition, and I saw some big strengths, but also some big weaknesses in the first edition Swashbuckler towards portraying the Swashbuckler that I wanted to play, that was doing swashbuckling deeds. So the other risky thing, which was different than the risk of being the same, was that I decided, let's look at it from the ground up. And I sort of forced poor Logan and Liz to bear with me a few times in all of these little cycles of panache discussions where I drew all these diagrams.
We knew pretty early on that we didn't really want to do the same kind of deed system, that we wanted you to get panache and spin panache, but rather than a point pool or something that's always on, to have kind of a back and forth.
Right.
But there were a lot of questions on what you had to do to get it, whether you started with it or started without it and got it, and whether you had to spend it or whether it could stick around.
And when you didn't have it, are you in a defense mode, or does the defense come from having spent it? And we wanted it to be more active, not a hoarder. I'm hoarding all my points like mega elixirs. You better let me get the final blow, which caused some real weirdnesses before. And so that was a pretty big risk because there were some changes mechanically. It really, I felt, held to the soul of the Swashbuckler. But I was worried there was going to be a lot of contention. There would be a lot of posts, and there were not a lot of posts. Elftro says new divination. If Mark is worried about a change, it'll be good.
Well, Mark was worried about resonance, so I think we can debunk that one immediately.
I was worried about resonance, but
everybody else was too.
That's true. I was worried about the sorcerer thing with splitting into 4 traditions, and people like that. So I think that's what Elftro was talking about. So anyway, the Swashbuckler, that's the one that not everybody, but that you guys overall really, really liked.
Yeah.
When reading the enjoyment, for the only time in any of the 16 classes we did this for, more people picked 5 stars, extremely excited, the top possible rating than any other rating. And pretty much the rest of people, almost all of them, picked the next best rating. So it was like 80% of people picked one of those 2 ratings of the Swashbuckler in every regard. We've never seen one that was rated that highly. There was tons of positive feedback, and also there were often things that are like, this is close to being ready to be printed, but it needs more options. Here are some tweaks. Here are some things that weren't working quite right, but I love this class. And so we listened to all the tweaks. Just the fact that we said that it was rated high, that doesn't mean nothing's going to change, because you guys gave us some good ideas for smaller tweaks. We know it's got to be expanded, although it had the most feats of any of the 4 to begin with in the playtest, and it's going to be able to get some more really cool feats based on all of you guys' opinions that you gave us in the feats section, telling us about the feats you liked, the ones you didn't, in the section where you said which kind of feats you'd want to prioritize, and of course in the free response where you gave us some pretty cool ideas too, and the message board. So I don't feel like I have to say a lot, although if you're wondering about the saving throw question that we put in there about whether you like reflex and will, the answer is yeah, you guys really like reflex and will as the thing that the Swashbuckler was good at, and not reflex and fortitude, and not reflex only. So that was strong agreement on reflex and will for the starting saves.
I think the Swashbuckler was also the one that, like, we kind of knew how that type of class, like a martial class that's focused primarily on combat, kind of plays. And all the other ones were kind of, especially like the Investigator and the Oracle. It's like, let's figure out from scratch how this class works. So it was nice to kind of be able to use some of our previous design for the Swashbuckler and kind of be like, well, we know how the fighter plays. How can this play a little differently and still be entertaining?
And oh man, it's just been so different with the Swashbucklers who are in my game. Like, the Fencer and the Gymnast are also really different from each other. The Gymnast is just like pinning down with Restrained these boss enemies that they're debuffing them and then just restraining them with critical successes on a grapple, which is really powerful. And the Fencer is just doing these massive bleed attacks that do tons of damage and really debilitate the enemy. So it's been a lot of fun. I think there's really not like a huge amount more about the Swashbuckler to say, except because all of the things to say are just pretty small and only would apply to a small segment of people each. But when we add them all together, I think we're going to be able to make the class even better thanks to all of you and your information on it. But let's move to the Witch.
All right.
The Witch had by far the most discussion online.
Yeah.
No question. It was over like 600 more than the next most. And the Swashbuckler had a total of like 400 posts.
Yeah.
This is mainly because of a lot of questions that I think Pinstriped Barbarian on the chat is, or no, it wasn't Pinstriped Barbarian. It was someone who was up higher a little bit. Someone on the chat up higher, which was also Pinstriped Barbarian, just did an earlier time. I just recognized that color.
Past Pinstriped Barbarian.
We're talking about like which traditions the Witch got access to. And that, it was. And so that took a lot of discussion. There was a lot of back and forth. There were just some good arguments either way about it. Sometimes some maybe a little bit rambunctious arguments either way. But Liz read all of those arguments and talked to everyone on the design team and also the creative director and everyone else, and we are considering both possibilities on that one. So there's some other things about the Witch. The Witch has, other than the Swashbuckler, had the highest overall satisfaction. People were pretty happy just about overall with like, this does pretty well. It's got a lot of spells. It's got as many prepared spells as the wizard, specialist wizard, without having to specialize and choose one from each from the same school. It's got hexes, which people considered to be overall, with its flexibility and some of the good hex choices, one of the strongest sets of focus spells that any of the casting classes had. And just overall, a strong and effective caster class that people enjoyed. But it wasn't always the strong and effective caster class that people enjoyed, that they wanted to see in every regard. And with that, I'll bring you to one of the only questions that we asked that was about a change that had a pretty sizable group that said more the other way than the way that you went in the playtest. And that's the question about, what about if they had one fewer spell at each spell level and a few cantrip hexes? And that one did have slightly over half of people saying, that might be better. And we usually did not get that that kind of close call, or that it was usually a blowout for the change that we made when we asked about the changes that we made. So that means that we are definitely considering what we're going to do with those very strongly, possibilities for how to get those in there.
I think there's at least going to be kind of a internal kind of test stage, like write it up and see if it feels like it works. One of the tricky things with those is you're adding another level of complexity to a very complex class. And this is the advanced player's guide, but we're not sure how advanced we want it to be for someone who's coming in fresh and just being like, I want to play a witch. And, well, here's your 4 pages of text you have to understand to even start. So we have to make sure that can come in a way that feels right, that kind of And some of those would have to probably be structured differently to work a little more like how the Bard works.
Right.
There's a lot of kind of questions about how you can do them and still have your normal focus spells,
right,
and not turn it into basically an at-will caster.
Because they need to not compete for your turn. Because once they've competed too strongly for your turn, that means that a no resource action is now competing strongly for your turn.
Right. Rather than casting a spell slot, you're just going to use your cantrips. That can be a real issue, especially because it frees up your spell slots in a weird way to do a bunch of stuff outside of combat that we don't necessarily think is good for the overall play of a game session or an adventure.
Plus, it just keeps you out of doing your spell slots because you think, oh, I can save them and do this.
It reduces your variety, which can be not great if they're structured the wrong way. So we have to be really careful.
As someone mentioned earlier in the stream, which I don't even think we may have thought of, it could break the Nails Hex if they are one action, because the Nails Hex, you can cast the Hex and then deliver a Nails Strike, so it could turn into a strike and triple hex or something.
I don't think at that point, if you're changing the hexes that much, you can't take anything for granted in the current mechanics, because it just doesn't apply anymore.
And it looks like Healer Zero says we need more familiar abilities. Well, there are more coming in the Advanced Player's Guide.
Just not in the playtest.
Not in the playtest, but there certainly will be some more familiar abilities. Additionally, there was a lot of discussion about like the fact that the lessons allow you to build your own flexible patron. Mm-hmm. And so some people said, this is the best. I can build whatever patron I want, and I get to decide what the flavor is on the patron. And the other people said, this makes me feel like I'm just sort of doing a thing and that my patron isn't giving me anything. And so we are looking into the possibility to sort of describe your patron selection a little bit better at first level and tie it in a bit more. It wouldn't be like a drastic change from how the witch works, and it's not
it would be a little more flexible than how it currently works is the idea. But we kind of have to see the proof of concept before we can commit to that and see.
So we're looking at it, but it's a little more flexible in some ways, and more so, it's not even for mechanical flexibility or not, but the fact that it ties you into feeling like your patron is doing something.
It just also happens to come with more flexibility.
Oh yeah, it sure does.
I also think King Trey III had like the perfect summation of every conversation we've had about the spell lists and message board conversation about the spell list. I still think not having divine patrons makes more thematic sense in my opinion, but I could also think it would make sense to add them.
Yeah, that's
like that's every conversation.
King Trey III, it's like you were there at the 3-hour meeting.
Yeah, it's always like, well, there are a lot of thematic reasons, like they don't have a whole lot of divine concept previously, but you could in theory see how a divine patron would make sense. So it's always kind of a back and forth where it's like it's so close to being a yes or a no that making that final decision, we kind of have to do a little more exploration of that. But
reflavoring for the witch, to make the patrons more obvious, reminded me of something we forgot to say in the Oracle. It just wasn't in the notes. You guys overall were, sorry to go back to the Oracle, were pretty happy about the idea of the curse progressing as you go more and more into your revelations, but there were a fair number of people who said they did sort of miss the flavor aspect that it was always there. So we are looking into the possibility of a like non-mechanical but cool flavor thing that is always there. But we don't have a proof of concept for that yet. We're not sure. But that is something that the patron thing from the witch reminded me.
There's also some comments going like, what if you get power from a demon lord? Shouldn't that be divine? I think that's kind of equating it with the sorcerer a little too closely, because the sorcerer, if they have the abyssal bloodline, they're divine because demons are by nature divine. Whereas if your patron is a demon lord, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are granting you spells the same way a god does. It means that they might be giving you arcane tools or primal tools or occult tools to access your power.
Like Abraxas, the demon lord of like esoteric knowledge, he could absolutely teach you occult and arcane secrets. In fact, much more likely than divine, probably, based on his theming.
Yeah, and that's one of the things with the witch is because like your ways of learning things and understanding things are so esoteric and could be so different from witch to witch. It doesn't have that same like direct through line that the sorcerer bloodline does. And that both makes it more flexible, with more possibilities, but also more complicated to figure out how do we actually model that in the game and have it feel consistent.
Mm-hmm. So I think that looks like it is. Oh, wait, there's one more thing. Just one more thing, which is that familiars. So we drastically and dramatically made it less bad for your familiar to be killed as a witch. And people said it is still too bad for your familiar to be killed as a witch. So, Oh gosh, I'm first of all, I'm sorry if you had to play the witch in first edition when it was even more bad, but we're gonna make it even less bad for your familiar to be killed as a witch. We're looking into ways to even more lessen the penalty. And I know that wizard fans, yes, your spellbook could be destroyed and have very costly consequences, but think of the chances that will happen compared to the poor witch losing their familiar, and I think you'll be okay with the witch having even fewer consequences for their familiar being destroyed than the playtest one did. And that about wraps it up for the 4 classes.
Yeah, and like we said, like all the classes had pretty good numbers. I know some people were asking earlier, like, what was the low one? There wasn't really a low one. They were clustered pretty close together, with the Swashbuckler being the high one.
Yes.
So
that's right. There's not one low one.
There's always room for improvement, but overall,
the witch was a little bit higher than the other 2. It was maybe significant. It's tough because when it's close, as you all know with statistics, and the numbers are not mega high, you can't really tell. But the Swashbuckler was way higher than the other ones. All right. So I think those are the 4 classes as an overview. So what order do we want to do this?
We said we'll open it up to some questions. So if people have questions about the individual classes, go ahead and drop those now. Or if you have stories about playing your characters, I know some of you have already been talking in the chat, kind of some of the stuff that happened in your games. And that's always interesting for us to see. Get a little more. I guess I
could queue up my story in brief. So I ran that up-leveled Cradle of Night. So we had our 10th level characters. They were a member of a group called the Coven's Eye Investigations, because it was led by the Investigator. We had 3 witches. Not everyone showed up to every session, but in theory, there was an Investigator, a Life Oracle, 3 witches, and a Fencer and Gymnast Swashbuckler. And the 3 witches had all 3 of the different spell lists. And so they started the adventure. I rewrote the the NPC that follows you around to just use Harmonize and Inspire Courage and Inspire Defense all the time. She's a bard and she's lower level than you. And so they just went through. Right away, there were some problems because there were some incorporeal creatures in the first dungeon that everybody's precision damage wasn't doing great against. But they made it through because the Life Oracle was really, really awesome. And the witches had a lot of blast spells up their sleeves. And after that, they just started really getting into their stride. The Life Oracle was able to just make a massive amount of damage go away or get redirected in just the right ways. The witches were always hexing and throwing in blasts when it was appropriate. And there was one encounter where like you get ambushed by a bunch of guys while talking to an information person, where they only took damage once on the final round when a guy that was hit with like 5 different conditions rolled a natural 20.
Peyton, you got to save that Scooby-Doo question.
Scooby-Doo question. Yeah, get the Scooby-Doo one in there.
So we've got some questions coming in. I noticed one about the sword cane coming through.
Okay.
So we do have like the basics of the sword cane. The reason we didn't put it in the playtest is because it's not going to be that much different from any other sword. It's just going to be more concealable. So it wasn't really going to be important for playtest data. So we just decided to kind of keep it out of the system, just because introducing kind of more randomness into the system when you're playtesting can be tricky. We want to just kind of hold off on that. But it's not going to be a wildly different weapon from other types of swords. It's just going to be, something you can conceal pretty easily.
Sure. Just to finish off, let me see, where was I? Oh, yes. So the witches were doing well. The gymnast was just constantly restraining things, going around the battlefield, causing massive amounts of control. When he got the finisher, I can't remember the name, the one where you roll twice and take the better, that was really, really good for him. He started being both a very high damage and very good control. They eventually made it into the final dungeon where they scouted around using all of the skills of the various classes. All were performing pretty well. In the end, against the final boss, the gymnast restrained it, and got it down really low, and the investigator hit it with the final blow and said case closed because it was her take the case.
Of course.
And then one of the witches like, is the case actually closed though? Because we didn't get the Cradle of Night yet. And the investigator's like, push. And she adjusted her glasses, which were Eyes of the Eagle. So it was a fun play test. People, my players had fun. Overall, they gave me some feedback on things to adjust and took the surveys too to help us out. So that's my little story. But we've got some great questions in here, like, can investigators get an animal companion feat a la Shaggy from Scooby-Doo? Well,
they might not have a feat, but there are ways to get animal companions in the book, I believe.
Yeah, they could take an archetype, because Shaggy, let's face it, is not a usual investigator. So
he's really more of an NPC class.
But you could take some of the archetype. There's an archetype in the book, so if you want to have Scooby-Doo with wolf stats, then you can have Wolfie Doo.
Shaggy's the companion, Scoob is the PC. That also
that's possible.
That makes sense. We don't have that ancestry in there.
Or I guess there was like the Venture Brothers Scooby-Doo parody where like the dog is only talking in the hallucinations of Shaggy, and maybe that is like the Eidolon, and
maybe that's an alchemist investigator who's really made some special extracts.
There you go. So let's see. Loosen.
Also, if you do play in a game with a Scooby-Doo and Shaggy, you need to have someone play an Oracle who's a construct, so they can be the mystery machine.
So let's see. There are a lot of people talking about Oracle curses, curses and mysteries with curses. We did find from the playtest that overall people were pretty positive about having curses that were thematically linked to their mysteries. That doesn't mean that there will definitely be no ability to choose either. There are various ways that they're potentially looking at that might be able to introduce that back in, but we do know at least that having a thematic link to what it was resonated very strongly overall in the surveys.
Yeah, it did. And also there's also a balance issue that gets really tricky when you can kind of take whatever curse, because you either have to construct it so tightly that it's really complicated to understand, or you end up with one curse that's just doesn't matter with the particular mystery you have, and so it's just
legalistic from first edition, where you just don't swear an oath, and then the fact that you have to keep your oath doesn't matter. Let's see. So,
assuming there will be more mysteries, King Trey III was asking about mysteries, possibly a Dark Tapestry mystery. There are definitely going to be a lot more mysteries. I don't think the list is finalized
it's
yet.
Not finalized.
But if you want Dark Tapestry, we'll put it in the hopper. A lot of it's going to depend on kind of how much space we have for those, because we know mysteries tend to be pretty long.
That's right.
We have to make sure we get all the core stuff and like the stuff people are really waiting for. And if Dark Tapestry makes that list, then hooray, but we don't know yet.
So Camlack is wondering if Swashbuckler will get more retorts. We said more stuff. Retorts is a type of stuff, so very likely. I'm not going to 100% guarantee it, but it would be strange.
Key ability score is also a type of stuff, and that doesn't mean we're going to be giving them more key abilities.
3 key ability scores. 4 key ability scores.
Swashbuckler numbers just going up and up.
Yeah. All right, let's see. So,
I know there's an intention, this is from Pharos 1968, I know there's an intention to have intelligence play more of a role for the investigator. Does that include combat options? Yeah, it does, and we're looking at particularly ways for something like study suspect or its equivalent to use int.
Yep.
For more of your combat options down the line to use int. There are a lot of different places where you can get that in. I also saw another question asking about maybe using int for certain skills, which is also a neat idea. One of the common comments on the message boards was asking to use int for perception. Generally, we don't like swapping out an entire ability score that way and just kind of doing it universally. But we are looking at maybe ways to sometimes use int for a different skill, or to use it in very specific circumstances. But usually we don't try to change that stuff out too much. We have a few exceptions, like the rogue, the thief rogue being able to use dex for damage. But we kind of like to make sure that the story stays continuous and that it doesn't, end up with kind of weird rules interactions by swapping those out. So it's not super likely, but we might try to find some way to incorporate a little bit of that.
Right. So let's see. Ezekiel says Gymnast's way of gaining panache is the only one that has a multiple attack penalty. That is true, but you also can gain panache with tumble through or doing a daring deed. So the Gymnast is a very, as I saw in my playtest, is a very strong build for Swashbuckler, but works a little differently, and you have to be pretty sure that you do want the control from the Gymnast's effects. Because if you don't want the control from the Gymnast effects at all, and you're like, no, I don't care if I've tripped them or grappled them, I just want to get my panache and do the thing, then Gymnast might not be the right one for you. They also do more damage because they pump up their strength for athletics, and that ups their damage as well.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, there's another question that's exactly the same question that's after that. Then... there's one about will DC on Study Suspect that maybe we're thinking of changing Study Suspect already, so it may not matter.
Yeah, the will DC, basically the will DC was chosen because that is kind of how a lot of other effects like Demoralize and stuff like that work, and some other things that aren't quite as like directly a mental thing as Demoralize. Right. But kind of like, I guess the it's more of a, we can't really use deception, which would be kind of the closest analog.
Yep.
Because of the way untrained skills work, deception would just be too low in too many cases. But we'd like to have something that's linked more to an ability of the monster and isn't quite as predictable, rather than something like just CR plus a number.
All right. So let's see. Any idea of more things like Vexing Tumble to open more panache doors? Pinstriped Barbarian asks. Yes, that is something we're trying out there. We only had one that opened up our panache doors, but we are looking into the option of potentially other. If there's a new feat that seems like it should be a panache gainer, then it will be. All right.
Yeah. So how about we get into a few other things, because we want to kind of talk about the end of the playtest, but as we end the playtest, we're also working more in depth on the Advanced Player's Guide. So we also kind of wanted to talk a little more about some of the other stuff that's going to be in that book.
Yep.
Mark, does this seem like a good time to move on to some of that?
I think so. But listen, everybody,
you
this
can keep
still
asking
doesn't
questions.
mean you have to stop asking questions about the playtest or anything else, or telling us stories about the playtest. If there's something funny, we might read it out loud for the YouTube and, posterity.
And someone is asking about the Cavalier archetype, which is another thing that is also in this book.
So speaking of the Cavalier archetype, if you haven't seen it, the solicitation, which is the text that appears on the product page or in advertisements, has gone up for the Advanced Player's Guide. And when I wrote that, I kind of dropped in some spoilers that we had not revealed about the book yet. One of which is the Cavalier and the Vigilante are back as archetypes in the Advanced Player's Guide. There's also going to be so we also announced it there that the Dragon Disciple and the Shadow Dancer are back, as well as new archetypes like a Familiar Master and a shield-focused archetype going to be in the book. So the question here from Vac Tersu is, what's the Cavalier's deal? And so we haven't fully finalized that yet, but it's going to be thematically similar to the one from the playtest, where it's like, you want to be a wizard who rides on a horse, a cleric who rides on a horse, a fighter, any kind of sort of mounted, more cavalier-like character. You can do that with the Cavalier archetype. You don't have to take a class that the entire class is having the horse. The horse can just be a part of your character, and you add it on with that archetype.
Yeah. And so one of the things we did for the archetypes in this book, we had a meeting with a bunch of the editorial team and kind of went through like, all right, did some brainstorming, pitched different archetypes that might be good. We narrowed that list down somewhat, but we also kind of told them at the start of that meeting is like, okay, if it was already a class in first edition, know that we're going to look through all those. So we did kind of look through all the classes and see which ones would work really well as archetypes. there are a few that it's like, there's no way this is an archetype. There are a few that are kind of in the middle. And then for this book, there were only 2 that really stood out as like, we think this would work better as an archetype for sure, and fits in this book particularly. And so that's the Cavalier and the Vigilante.
Oh, looks like Vakrasu is happy with the but on a horse archetype.
Yes. And Mark kind of described the Cavalier. The reason the Vigilante we decided to do as an archetype was because it was kind of multiple classes in one in its original incarnation anyway. But now the way archetypes work in second edition, we thought we could do the kind of the core parts of the Vigilante that were consistent between all the different types of Vigilante. We could do those, and then you could kind of say, I'm an Investigator Vigilante, I'm a Spellcaster Vigilante,
right,
and get the kind of secret identity stuff through just the archetype.
And that's the feel of the original Vigilante. It had like a million archetypes that all were like, I'm this, but a Vigilante. Yeah. So, and the way the Cavalier got in there, and honestly, the Vigilante was based on your guys' feedback from the playtest. Not this playtest, the whole playtest for second edition, where we asked, what do you guys think about the Cavalier being in here as an archetype? And the answer was, that's awesome, but be careful about which other classes you put in there, because that might not be the right call for that many other classes other than the Cavalier. That was a big choice. There was another one that was like, that's awesome, and honestly, there are a lot of classes that were like that. So generally, the idea that it was awesome for the Cavalier, but we should look carefully at which other ones we put it on. That's what you guys said. So we looked carefully, and the Vigilante was a clear cut. Here's a kit added to another class. The Cavalier was pre-approved by all of you guys with a very high rate. So those are the ones that we put in as archetypes in this book. And there will be no other classes that are like, you see the class name again and it's an archetype in this book.
And we got a comment about Mystic Bolt needing to be in there for the Vigilante. We'll see if there's a place that fits in. I don't know. I think there's a lot more Mystic Bolty stuff in general right now.
Yeah, like at this point,
a little better setup.
If you're being like the more caster Vigilante, just be a caster, and your Mystic Bolt at will attack is that you're a wizard and you can just shoot out your cantrips at people, and then Force Bolt is your wizard focus spell, right?
Yeah.
So there's your Mystic Bolt.
Yeah.
So let's see. That's something we already told you guys about. We
actually, chat, what are some of the sections of Advanced Player's Guide you most want to hear about?
Yeah, what are you most excited about?
There are going to be new ancestors and backgrounds. There's going to be the new classes you already know a lot about.
We told you what the ancestries and heritages are, but do you want to hear more details about the new ancestries? We can give you a little bit more. Do you want to hear?
We've also got a question about how the kineticists might show up in 2E. That is one that I think is we've talked about a little bit, but that one is way too nebulous to really go into detail about.
I have ideas, but
Mark
ideas.
Has ideas.
Only ideas.
Yeah. We'll stop him before he
archetypes, archetypes, new options for existing classes, class options, new classes, catfolk, new subclasses.
Oh, someone wants to know about evil champions.
Yeah, evil champions and then champion subclass. There's 2 in a row who want that. So, yeah, there's going to be evil champions. That was also in the solicitation. Mm-hmm. The 3, what are they? The causes of evil. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, one for each of the evil alignments, just like the good alignments.
No plans for neutral champions in this book. Nope. We so far have not seen a concept that really said like, oh, this is a cool enough, compelling story hook to make the neutral champions feel like the same types of crusaders that good and evil champions are. Which is not to say
I have no strong feelings either way.
Yeah, it's not to say it could never happen, but we haven't seen the right thing yet. And given how much other champion stuff we wanted to put for the existing good ones in this book, trying to do kind of all 3 sets was going to be too much for this book.
Okay,
anyhow.
I'm seeing Catfolk and Aasimar in there a lot. So the Catfolk have some really sort of fun options. If you guys have been paying close attention, sometimes the bestiary monsters get abilities that wind up being something you can later take in the ancestries. So you have seen an ability called Cat's Luck, I think, in the bestiary version of the Catfolk.
Yeah.
Guess what? Not only can you get that, you can get an ability later at a higher level where you can pull off giving your whole party that ability on one effect. So if you get fireballed, everybody can get it, which is
it's really good.
Pretty wild. That's a very lucky cat that you always want to have along. And Catfolk, just There's more information about the way they interact with people that I think is really fun. Our freelancer on that one was Ron Lundeen, and other than people on the design team, just because of the books he's been on, he has written the most new ancestries to this point, and he gave us a really polished and interesting cat folk that I think you guys are going to enjoy.
The bestiary point is a good note, because we do try to make the bestiary entries and the ancestries feel kind of similar, but because we kind of decoupled the exact mechanics the way they were in first edition, it does give us a little more leeway to kind of tinker with things. Like, for example, the rat folks had a swarming ability in the bestiary that is pretty cool, but it's a little too narrow for a PC playing that ancestry. So like their option to get it is a little more versatile.
Right. And similarly, you'll notice the ancestry options in
take the feet for cheek pouches. There's a feet. Just take the feet.
Yeah, do it,
Alex.
But there's a lot of creatures in the bestiary that you might have noticed when they come up, they don't have that many of their sort of class abilities, but they just are loaded up on things from their ancestry more than a normal character would have. That's intentional, so that when you fight lizard folk or orcs or whatever, you feel like you're fighting a lizard folk and not against an enemy fighter who just happens to have one lizard folk option, say. Yeah. But you can sort of look into those and use them a little bit to find out more. It's not always, like Logan said, it's not always for sure. So Aasimar was another that a lot of people asked about, and then a few asked about Tieflings and Dhampir too. All of those new versatile heritages, which is what they're called, Changeling, Dhampir, Aasimar, Tiefling, and Duskwalker, are a heritage that you can apply on any ancestry. They're not a separate ancestry of their own. This makes them far more flexible and allows you to play them pretty much with any, like, you want to be an elf who's got some angel blood, you can be an elf who's got some angel blood. A dwarf whose mother was bitten by a vampire, you can be a dwarf Dhampir. And these versatile heritages will basically open you up into a new world of options that only the people from that heritage can take. They're kind of like the half-elf and the half-orc, if you imagine that anybody could take them. And you know how they're half-elf and half-orc feats only half-elf and half-orc can take. So they're not going to give you like that much mechanically right away, because they also open up all of these new options for you, and then all sorts of new options. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what sorts of combinations people are going to do with that.
And we got a question about half-elf and half-orc not being versatile. The core rulebook talks about that some, because they are just a human ancestry, but it does mention in there, it's like, you can talk to your GM if you want to be a half-elf gnome or something, that because of kind of the way the world works,
in the Lost Omens setting, they are not versatile.
Yeah, in Golarion, they're only on humans, but it's not imbalanced if you do choose to have them with a halfling or a goblin. If you want to do a half-elf, half-goblin, more power to you.
Yep.
Peyton, could you scroll up? There was a question a while back about the Zen Archer.
Yes, because we said in the solicitation that there will be a Zen Archer option for the monk, and there sure will.
Keep going.
Where is it?
Yeah, there
Zen Archer Monk.
What unique... so from Hida Owin, Zen Archer Monk, what unique stuff is it leveraging? And given monks don't have in-class rackets, is it just a feat chain?
So I would say that the word just does not give it credit. Having class feats for something makes it far more flexible than having to go into a dedication or take some kind of class archetype. That just means every monk can get it, every multi-class monk can get it, but it is a Zen Archer. The Zen Archer concept is going to be represented in some feats that are in the book, and we've not finalized those yet to the point that we can give you lots of details in the same way we could with the cat folk, for example.
But it does make it easier to be like, I punch and I shoot arrows both, and you can kind of make a pretty flexible character, and especially since you can use finesse to make both your melee attacks and your ranged attacks.
And the original Zen Archer in Pathfinder First did not lose the increased damage dice of their fist, and they really didn't lose almost anything, except for that they traded out which kind of feats they got and which flurry they did. So
it's not going to be hard to make them a little less powerful than they were in 1E. So King Trey,
don't worry, King Trey.
Don't run away.
Honestly, the Zen Archer in first edition, it wasn't so much that they were more powerful than other archers. It's that all archers were extremely powerful, and the Zen Archer sort of cookie cutter forced you to get the good things, whereas you might have accidentally not taken them on another class. So a lot of people's first experience with a PF1 archer that had all the best stuff was the Zen Archer, when the bonus feats tell you what to take.
Yeah.
So let's see. There were some other questions about archetypes. That was the one that I saw a lot of times that we just didn't do yet. So there's a lot of new archetypes that anyone can take. Some of them are just a brand new concept. A lot of them are things you might recognize from before.
Well, and we went with kind of a mix. Some of them are kind of like things that used to be prestige classes. A lot of them are just like very basic concepts like pirate or archaeologist, assassin, stuff like that. And then there are a few. I know we got a question of like whether the arcane archer was going to be in here. We do have
the Eldritch Archer.
The Eldritch Archer.
Here, so you can arch with whatever of the 4 types of magic you want.
Arch whatever you want to arch.
Yeah.
The Familiar Master is not our answer for the summoner.
No,
the Familiar just cares about about familiars, which are way smaller in scope than an Eidolon.
Familiar Master is all about I want the best familiar.
Yeah. Or
just get a familiar.
I'm a class that doesn't have a familiar, but I want a familiar. I'm going to get a familiar.
Absolutely. And it's going to be cool. That we announced in the solicitation Iron Wall, the shield user that's going to be great at using shields, even if you're not a fighter or a champion. And we have other ones like that too. There's an archer in there, which I don't care what class you are, other than the fact that
it's just called Archer.
Yeah, it's just called Archer. And obviously, it's not going to give you a martial character's attack bonus.
But it makes you just like the guy in the cartoon.
No. That's not what it does.
You'll be a terrible spy, but no, it's not.
Sorry. It makes you good at bows. So if you want to be a wizard and you just have like great archery options, your accuracy is still a wizard's accuracy, but you darn well have great archery options, and you can get those pretty efficiently with the archer archetype, for example. So there's all sorts in here that help your combat style, and there's some that are just great fun. Like, let's see, the dandy archetype, which I think Jessica Redicott, one of our freelancers, wrote. It was sort of somewhat based on some of the powers of the ultimate intrigue dandy, and it's just hilarious. Like, if you thought when I said dandy archetype, why is that an archetype? Would I want to be a dandy? When you see it, I think you'll want to be a dandy.
Especially
it's just fun.
Especially if you're playing a goblin, you're probably really going to want to be a dandy.
And there's a lot of skill feats in there, so it's not heavily intensive on your feats to take it, and you can just do fun things like crashing into a party and just getting invited to it, or like.
So you're going to want dandy and vigilante, so you can be like Bruce Wayne,
or lying your way into getting the effects of other actions because people think that you were saying things right, or all sorts of. Yeah, you could be a dandy vigilante. That could be hilarious.
We got a question about what we can expect for new spells in this book. So in addition to kind of the new focus spells
and rituals
and rituals, are there any rituals we want to talk about? Because we will have a section of those.
There's some good ones. We told everybody about reincarnate and create demiplane already in the solicitation. But what they don't know is really any of the other rituals that we're going for here, which are going to include. What's your favorite of the ones I have on this piece of paper?
Well, I think one that's kind of a classic is Simulacrum.
Oh yes.
So you can make a copy. There's also going to be some like brand new ones, like all the ones we talked about so far are a little more ones you're used to. But we also want to make sure we got some brand new stuff in there.
That's right. We have one that the idea came from the message boards. A lot of you guys, and credit to whoever it was, I can't remember the original person, where said, what if there was like a site-bound, long-lasting, unseen servant that just takes care of you at your base and does things there? And that made it onto the outline because that was just such a cool idea that you guys had. It's 100% from you.
We've got a question from Ezekeru. Put your pronunciation in chat.
Is it Ezekiel, like Ezekiel, but in Japan?
But the question is, anything for necromancers? So we know that the necromancy spell list was a little short in the core rulebook. So we're making sure there's actually a pretty good chunk of necromancy spells in this book, or there's going to be in the final book. We're still working on sorting those out. And especially like with the witch in there, the spells tend toward being a little more thematic with the new classes that are in that book, with still a pretty good selection of all kinds of other interesting stuff that that just seemed cool, regardless of what classes are in there.
Yep.
But there's going to be quite a few necromancy spells, a pretty good number of curses. What are some of the other?
I got Ezekiel right, apparently.
Nice. There's
honestly,
also,
Logan, you just did a sort of a breakdown of them, so I think you're the only one on the team who actually knows knows what they all are.
Yeah, and there's
some we asked for that are classics that we know that you guys kind of wanted from either you told us or we went in through Advanced Player's Guide and Ultimate Magic and looked for some of the best ones. So we're bringing back some of those old classic spells, such as, let's see, like Vomit Swarm, Aqueous Orb.
Yeah, Animate Rope.
Animate Rope is somewhat classic. We'll get some of the summons that are missing, like for the Lawful and Chaotic friends.
And there's going to be one thing people have been asking for a lot, which is an Animate Dead. Essentially similar to a summon, but you're raising dead creatures.
And it's a necromancy spell in case you don't like conjuration. So it's a, concentrate a dead thing comes out of the ground. Now it is yours. So yeah, there's a lot of fun things in the spells section that are coming up.
There was also a good question on there about kind of what else is going to be in here for the pre-existing classes, the core rulebook classes.
Oh yeah, a few people did ask about that.
They're all getting a section, like the monk we already talked about getting archery in addition to various other stuff. They're
sure do.
They're all going to have a variety of stuff. They're not going to be too short. Like for example, with the champion, we knew we were adding evil champions, so like we need to make sure this section is long enough that we can put in plenty of good champion stuff too.
Yep. It's not all the evil champions. If you love champions and you love them for being good, there's gonna be something for you.
And we haven't dug super deep into those yet, partially because we want to get the new classes solidified a bit. So the parts that talk to the new classes, but it's like investigator style stuff for the rogue will be kind of a little more
we talked about the sort of like the mastermind racket idea in the solicitation, so there is going to be at least some kind of mastermind, which right now we think is a racket, but we so that can be a good vector to get those more investigative focus, but possibly the Moriarty to your Sherlock Holmes. Instead of, and it also could play a rogue who like is one of those sort of like, I'm a criminal investigator, you can just hire me, I'll break into places and find out what your wife is doing, or something like that. There's
another monk concept that I'm really keen to see, but I'm not going to say what it is. I'm just going to take a drink.
There's also going to be some more poisoning options for the alchemist. I was going to be in there. There's going to be a focus spell version of.
No, I'm just.
Oh, you pointed.
I'm just winking at Pinstriped Barbarian.
A focus spell version of Rangers is going to be in there. We mentioned it as a spellcasting ranger in the solicitation because we're not going to get into nitty gritty rules terms, and some people thought that meant it's getting 9 spell level. No, it's focus spell option like the monk. Think monk.
Yeah.
Whatever the monk is currently doing where they can optionally get them. You guys asked for that also in the playtest, original second edition playtest survey. Across the board, very high. There were a good number of people who actually said no spells for Ranger ever, but the amount that said spells for Ranger, get it out pretty soon as a priority in a new rules book after the core was high. And so we're doing it. We're doing the thing you wanted.
And doing it as focus spells lets us make them a little more specific without kind of adding like weird combat spells to the druid list that don't do anything for a druid because they're or to the primal list that don't do anything for most primal casters.
So the sorcerer is going to have some cool stuff like the genie bloodline, the psychopomp bloodline, shadow bloodline, and the nymph bloodline.
Yeah, and the genie and the nymph are both like good indications that it's like even though we have the more general elemental bloodline and we have the more general fey bloodline, we can still kind of dig deeper if we think like, oh, there's a really cool concept that's more genie specific. We can still do that genie bloodline.
And people online guessed it when they're like, that's interesting because the elemental is more primal, and then they looked in the bestiary and saw, a lot of the elementals do primal stuff, but the genies all do arcane stuff for their spells. Maybe it's the other side of the elemental planes because material essence is the intersection between those two. You online people figured it out. So what else? Just more animal companions, more
there's some
familiar
animal
stuff.
Companion, familiar stuff.
Like you guys asked for earlier in the stream with the witch. There's going to be plenty more of both of those in there, and that is a good cross section of some of the new class options. Yeah. There's stuff for every class in this book. Yeah. And if we didn't mention it, that just means that like we didn't specifically demand a significant portion on something, and we haven't completely decided what we're doing with that text yet, because this is actually a pretty early time for us to give you guys some insight into the book.
There are definitely some new animal companions to answer that question.
Oh yeah,
there are some new options.
There absolutely are some cool options for animal companions. Some of which I guess I freelanced them over, so assuming that Liz and Logan and Jason like them, push the envelope a little bit in certain ways that hopefully will be very mechanically sound, but let you get cool animal companions that are a little different than the ones that you could have before.
There's also going to be some new gear, like as evidenced by the sword cane being in the investigator list. There's going to be a little chunk of kind of some new weapons and mundane items, in addition to all the alchemical and magical items that are going to be in here.
So Pinstriped Barbarian is hoping for more deities with all the rules to play them. Pinstriped Barbarian, do I have the book for you? It's not the Advanced Player's Guide, but it's coming out before the Advanced Player's Guide. Lost Omens, Gods, and Magic, which has a cover that was just like amazing because it's a triptych of the ascended deities in the setting, is full of not only like really cool strong lore information about deities, but just a big table in the back with enough to play even more deities. So you're going to want to look out for Lost Omens, Gods, and Magic, the next Lost Omens book coming up, and be sure to get that one. We do not have that in the Advanced Player's Guide.
There's a good question there about magic items to help spellcasters hit more often with their attack spells, I'm guessing. We haven't really gone super in depth in the magic items, and to some extent that's kind of one of the most, because it's so disparate and because it needs to cater to so many different masters, because it's got all the new classes, it's got new stuff for the old classes. We don't really have all that finalized yet, and we kind of have to look at the numbers on those and see if there's a problem there that we need to fix.
Here's what we did say. We're going to have cool wands that are not just the spell, but that do something else in addition to the spell, and they're going to be in here. And we've also already committed to cool potions, so that way people have said in the playtest, my witch wants to be the potion witch, but there aren't enough different kinds of potions. There's going to be some potions. They're going to be cool and different and make you think, hey, I want to brew some potions in my cauldron. Yeah. So we've committed to those.
And King Trey, I don't think you have to worry about whether a Chakek is in Gods and Magic. There are a lot of gods in that book, like a lot. There are a lot of options for anyone who wants to get on the divine.
There sure are, and just like the amount that James Jacobs likes a Chakek, I'm sure that he's going to get some things.
Probably in there.
So let's see. OTG Wraith is wondering about shield stuff from we were talking about the errata stream. So we haven't moved completely forward on anything else other than the ones we shared with all of you, but we're definitely have been looking into the ones that you guys pointed out, especially after the stream, and other topics on that regard. We'll let you know when we have anything official.
Prince Sateriel asks if there are any artifacts. Artifacts are going to be in Game Mastery Guide.
Yep.
Because Advanced Player's Guide is a lot more player focused, it's going to be primarily player content, and the number of like rare and uncommon things and unique things is going to be pretty small. We do have a few sections, and there are going to be a few items and spells that are.
We've announced that we have rare and unique backgrounds as a new concept that's in the book. For what if your background is so weird that you kind of have to discuss it with the rest of the group and the GM, because either it's unique and literally your background is I am the crowned heir to this kingdom, and that means no one in the party could be because that's the only one, or is so rare that I was the chosen of this deity or something like that. So we're going to have some, but if you want artifacts, Game Mastery Guide, and relics, a cool type of sort of item that scales along with your character as you go, Game Mastery Guide. Yeah. So
and artifacts, because they usually require so much work on the adventure side to be incorporated, we really like to put those on the GM side, because if it's rare and it's in a player book, that usually means it's something that we kind of expect you can ask your GM if you can have, whereas we don't expect you to ask your GM if you can have a deck of many things.
Right.
That's not really generally how it works, so we don't put that in the player book.
So Ezekiel has an amazing question that sort of segues in with the rare and unique backgrounds, which is, what about the new ancestries? So in general, any of these options, like backgrounds, ancestries, normally for a rare option, right, you'd give it out as treasure during the run, and the GM would say, you found this magic item, now you have it, even though it's rare. You obviously can't give out a new background to someone in the middle of their run. It's like, now your background is this, or at least it doesn't work the same way. So with any of those options that are character creation options, having a uncommon, a rare, or a unique trait just means, let's have a discussion, figure out what you're going to do about it. With the new ancestries, as you saw in the Lost Omens character guide, there was a whole sidebar about that. The Game Mastery Guide has a big discussion about that. Generally, because of the fact that in the Lost Omens Inner Sea area, where a lot of the game is meant to take, is assumed to take place, those ones in the core rulebook are the most common. So most other ancestries and options, or especially heritages like changelings, that not everybody had a hag parent or a vampire bite their mom or something like that, they're going to be uncommon. They're going to be things to talk about. But we want to make it clear, and we have so far in a sidebar each time, that uncommon for those means discuss and use, especially where it's appropriate. Dompirs and Changeling is an Ustalov, of course. You have Tengus in the Shackles, of course. And if you're playing in Tian Sha, the Tengus are probably common, and like dwarves and halflings are not common. So it all depends on where you're playing, what campaign you're playing. Hopefully player's guides for different APs will be able to potentially in the future tell you, oh, this is in this area. Hey, guess which ones are common for this AP? And that's sort of the kind of session zero and discussion with the group that we're hoping to foster. Like, I feel like if we make some of them sporadically common or uncommon, it'll make some groups think that we want you to use only the ones that we listed as common, but we want you to use all of them where it makes sense for you. And that could just be all of them. So, let's see. That was a great question, Ezekiel. Let's see. Sethrael likes relics.
Yeah.
Arovia, there's a lot of ELs.
I'm not sure if you're talking about relics as in relics, the game system, because the Game Mastery Guide does have relics, and I don't think a whole lot of information is out about those yet.
Well, we mentioned
but
it.
Those are also in the right,
said,
but they're in the Game Mastery Guide for a similar reason, because they also require the GM's input for all this stuff.
The GM has to decide: am I going to use these and give a little less treasure? Or am I just going to say, screw it, everybody gets a relic and more treasure? It should be okay. Like the GM and the players work together to tell the story of the relic, which I think that's something that Jason tried so hard to get even into the original playtest, but it was just such a big concept, needed so much refinement, and I think it tells an amazing story, and I think a lot of people are going to want to use the relics from the Game Mastery Guide.
Yeah. And the relics and artifacts are a bit different, because the relics are something you have to build into the system, but they're generally kind of on par with other player powers, whereas artifacts are just like, well, this can screw up like half your adventures if they have it. So those are kind of work in different ways.
What's your favorite thing you've seen so far in the Advanced Player's Guide minus the class that you worked on?
Oh, geez.
Oh, gosh.
I'm going to come back to that one. Can you tell us your favorite backgrounds? We're getting some favorites questions.
Yeah, that's hard. Do you remember? I mean, you just came up with adding new backgrounds from the APG into the descriptions of the new ancestries, which the freelancers didn't know the new background, so they gave us the old ancestries. Did you find any that seemed really compelling at that point?
The backgrounds are a nice mix, because this is like
Hi, Watersley.
The first really player-focused rulebook after the core rulebook. A lot of them are very simple concepts. There's stuff like bandit, like servant, but then there's also enough kind of interesting different ones that it is still going to be some surprises in there, some stuff you might not have thought about picking before you started looking through them. Like the root worker is kind of interesting. It's kind of does natural medicine.
And it's sort of like a little bit of anti-hex magic plus natural medicine together into it's from a very interesting cultural tradition that the freelancer wanted to bring in and add as a background. So I think that one's pretty cool.
There's also some ones like bookkeeper, Like I like some of the more like, how did this person become an adventurer anyway? Kind of ones can be really, really fun. The Outrider is pretty neat, which is kind of like not really the same as a scout, a little more kind of like a horse person, not like a horse person, but you know, a horse rider.
I'm just liking so many of the things I'm going through in this book, which actually makes me feel really good. A lot of times, like I've been looking at some archetypes. A lot of times, archetypes in first edition, really because of all the moving pieces, like the freelancer would do a great job, but I'd still have to do a lot of surgery on it because, oh, well, this changed favored enemy, but now Quarry and these other ranger options have changed or whatever. Here, I'm just being like delighted by, oh, the dandy can do this. Oh, the diva has a reaction to one-up the person who just tried a skill check in order to give themselves a bonus or something like that. It's just a lot of things that I think people are going to enjoy, and it's just whatever I worked on last, I find something that I'm excited to see. So this book is really exciting me about the possibilities and about some of the cool ideas that our freelancers are coming up with that make me go, hey, this is something I can use.
I like the kobolds have an ability to cringe.
Don't
and
kill me,
another one to grovel. So those are fun.
Please. No, the kobolds are great. John Compton did the kobolds, and he really added a lot of flavor to them. And we're getting a little bit closer towards the end of the stream, and we're gonna raid Jason at 5:30 when he starts the PAX stream with Glass Cannon. So I'm gonna ask you to get ready for the raid when we get a little bit closer. There's just a few more minutes before that happens. Let's see what questions.
Any medium-sized variants of kobolds? No, they're small.
Not. They're small.
You get we should add a mundane piece of gear that's a milk crate, and you stand on that, and that's your medium kobold.
Wait, remember create crate from the Advanced Class Guide original?
There's a create crate spell that didn't make it into the final book.
Yeah, it was the second level spell, and it just made a crate.
Instead, we put in literally anything else.
Let's see. So Aroviel is wondering when we might tell what's changing thanks to playtest feedback. And if you go to the beginning of the stream, we gave a lot of tips about what directions we're heading towards. And let's see. When you create backgrounds, how concerned are you about the power level of their abilities?
Well, the backgrounds we've done so far are mostly like they're pretty even on the power level of their abilities.
I'm guessing that the person asking was thinking, well, this is a really good skill feat like Battle Medic, and that makes it stronger. But in theory, assuming that skill feats, skills, and ability scores being equal, the backgrounds are also pretty equal. Like, we're not going to do one that's like, this one gives you the 20th level Wizard Feat Meta Magic Master instead of any of the other abilities from it.
And some of the early drafts of backgrounds had some of a bit of a problem with character optimization. And one of the reasons the ability modifiers are so flexible with backgrounds is because we were running into that problem, and we didn't want someone to feel like they couldn't play a detective just because it was a suboptimal set of ability boosts. And that's why we made those like pretty flexible in the final version.
That makes sense. Looks like Eric him is asking about plans to expand to different settings. If they existed, this would neither be the place nor the right people to tell you about them. So we can tell you all about the rules coming up because we've got design in the bag. But if you will find out about anything like that from someone who's not us, and not now. Let's see.
Someone wants a summon chandelier spell for the Swashbuckler. Swashbuckler can't cast spells, so it should probably be a magic item.
Yes.
One of the structure items, so you can just... It builds a little drawing room with a chandelier in the middle of the battlefield.
That's right, the structures. We have the rules for it now with the structure type. What kind of support for summoners who want to have tons of different people on the field? We honestly don't want to support having tons of different creatures that you have to control on the field for just a logistical game reason, that if you have 12 different things and they all have to take a turn, it's just going to get things a little bit out of control. It'll clutter up the map for a lot of the typical sizes of map that we play, we create dungeons on and make flip mats of, so that your other characters can't get to places.
And it kind of crowds out the other PCs is kind of the biggest issue.
Yes.
And there's also like some ways, like if you want to have a horde of skeletons, like it might not necessarily be that the best way to do that within the rules is to have 18 different skeletons that you're then controlling, but to do some other type of spell that, you know, is an area where skeletons are trying to claw everybody.
Or even create a stats for a skeleton mob that is like taking up 4 squares and moves around like a swarm and attacks.
Yeah.
Kind of like a flaming sphere or a swarm. Where it can attack once per round.
Nicholas, we did say there are some new summon spells coming with new types. So those are already going to be in there.
And we did say Animate Dead would be as akin to a summon, but it's not technically a conjuration. It's a necromancy, and you animate up some dead. Let's see.
Ezekiel is asking if there are any one-action spells. One-action spells are kind of tricky. They tend to appear more in focus spells than in other spells, just because we don't necessarily want you spamming a whole bunch of spells all in a row. So they tend to be kind of helper effects rather than kind of the main thing you're doing in your turn. Like we don't do a lot of one-action attack spells apart from like one-action magic missile. So there probably aren't going to be a whole ton, but you might see a handful.
Right. Certainly, we don't tend to put in a lot of one-action cantrips because of the fact that then they're always cast with the 2-action spell.
Yeah.
Unless that's a big focus of your class, like the Bard, to have one of those that you're doing as your 3rd action.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. And
we're also we're getting pretty close to rating Jason's live game. So we're gonna give you your instructions pretty soon here. So
in just a few minutes.
That.
Waters Leaf says, with the lighter workload, looking over freelancer contributions, will be getting books faster.
There is not a lighter workload. I don't know who told you that.
I said that the archetypes were easier to deal with than archetypes have been in the past, but that's because usually they were very, 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 very hard to deal with and took more time than they would for another page in the book. Now they take as long as the other things do.
We've got a couple questions about gishes, or if people aren't familiar with that term, it's people who can both cast magic and do martial stuff. There are quite a few archetypes in here that are kind of speak to, like the archer that Mark talked about earlier. There are ones to get armor. There's a lot of things to kind of give you some of those kind of like proficiencies and tools that are going to help you kind of fluctuate between those roles. And get into both combat and cast spells.
And they're honestly pretty amazing just with the 3-action economy.
Yeah.
Because you cast a non-attack spell and then attack. Yeah. And you got a good turn. With haste, you can do even more.
And there's no straight up Magus in this book.
Yep.
The Magus is something we're looking at for down the road, but this wasn't a place where we had the time to do it or the space to do it in the right way.
It wasn't the right one to add here compared to the other ones that you guys asked for more back in the old survey that had your classes. So we're super close to Jason's stream, so we're going to give you some instructions. So get ready for the raid. When it pops up, say yes. And when you get into the chat of the PAX Glass Cannon stream, type in all caps benevolent GM ! It's a reference to Jason. He won't be able to see it because he'll be up there on the stage, but he'll know in spirit that you're saying benevolent GM.
Sometimes he likes to have his phone out.
Oh,
he does like to have his phone out a lot. That's true. He might just be like, "Did somebody say something about me?" Oh,
and let's see.
Don't say benevolent GM at us. That's for Jason. You gotta wait till after the raid. You gotta get in that stream and then you say benevolent GM.
Lightning round. Last 2
GMs.
red focused questions. So, it's Sione who did some good math on the Alchemist on the forum. Sione is saying, of the archer, would that be more to make the fighter archer or ranger archer even more archery, or is it more for others? It's more to let anybody be a really cool archer. I mean, the fighter and the ranger are both going to find things to like that they didn't have.
But they're the ones who have just like all.
They already had a lot of options. Yeah. It might not have been worth it to them to take the dedication for it, even though there are things that they would prefer.
But like a rogue archer might be able to get something out of it, and certainly like a wizard archer or somebody like that.
Especially, yeah. And let's see. Can we give Ezekiel the favorite? We already gave I gave the favorite thing. You didn't give the favorite thing.
The favorite thing in the whole book?
Other than our own class.
I don't know.
I just said it was whatever I had just done, which is pop out also.
Whatever I just did is the Tengu, which is really cool.
The Tengu is great. James Case is a big fan of the traditional lore of the Tengu, and he sort of breathed a combination of that into the Galarian Tengu with respect to the Jinx Eater lore, all the different lore of the Tengu that we've ever told, with some new stuff that's traditional. And like, you can do a thing, you know, traditionally Tengu would look like a human with a red face and a big long nose. You can do that now. So there's all sorts of fun options in there. It's a good one. All right. So that's going to be our last question. The raid is going to be now in less than a minute. So be sure to raid Jason. I have heard from Jason this is going to be pretty funny with Glass Cannon. Benevolent GM.
Benevolent GM.
Make sure you have it copy pasted. You can just type it into ours to make sure you've got the all cap Benevolent GM. But
there you go. Perfect.
Yes, Ezekiel got it just right, and so did Ninja did Cobalt.
Perfect.
Yes, that's exactly what we're looking for. Yes. So yeah, I heard from Jason. It's gonna be a wild time. And Glass Cannon is
great players,
exciting, and this is in their wheelhouse, so it should be a lot of fun. Yep.
So just be aware that so you're not
we're sending you over right at 5:30, but they might not have started yet. All right. So everyone's ready. You've got the Benevolent GM, and we'll see you next week for the Age of Ashes. Let's go.
All right, ready to start it.
And we won't see you, but Paizo will see you.
All right, say goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.